Steel City. Is everybody ready to go? Let's proclaim the greatest radio show.
Welcome, fans, to our Week 15 edition of our fantasy football segment. I'm Jim Sella. You're listening to The Spread. In studio, as usual, with the fantasy extraordinaire / guru of all gurus, Jay Dash, and a special guest for the fantasy segment this week, Johnny Parlay.
It's do or die time, folks.
Parlay, you're in the fantasy playoffs.
That's right, coming off a first week bye.
Going up against your rival.
Oh, it's going to be a bloody grudge match.
As bloody as fantasy football can get, right?
I may not show my face for a couple weeks if I don't take this one.
Well, you own my number one quarterback this week in Andrew Luck.
He's been about it all year. Well, I'm just
about
glad
it.
I'm just glad last week didn't count for Andrew Luck because he still put up points, but he had a terrible game, one of the worst of his career.
Let's start it off. Tier 1, what's the rest of them?
Behind Luck is Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers, and Tom Brady.
If you have any of these guys and you're worried about who to start, you're an idiot.
Usual suspects in this group, right?
Believe it.
Yeah, Miami has a good pass defense, but I'm still playing Brady no matter what. Tier 2, Phillip Rivers, Matt Ryan, and Russell Wilson.
Matt Ryan going up against Pittsburgh. If you got him, you got to play him because the Steelers' pass defense is garbage.
Well, you're probably going to get a 60-yard touchdown out of him at least. And Phillip Rivers has a great matchup versus Denver. Their defense isn't terrible, but you know San Diego is going to be passing a ton.
Well, I got Rivers on the bench, but definitely go Luck, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely Luck. Tier 3, Big Ben, Jay Cutler, and Tony Romo.
Big Ben fighting his way back to Tier 3, the top of Tier 3 even. He's going up against Atlanta. They give up the 11th most points to fantasy quarterbacks. Big Ben has 340-plus yards passing in 5 of his last 6 games, 8 TDs and 0 picks against NFC opponents this year, but has thrown 5 picks in his last 4 games, so let's hope that trend does not continue.
Both Cutler and Romo have good matchups this week. I'd probably play Cutler over him. He had 341 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick versus Dallas last week, but you got to remember, Brandon Marshall's done for the season. That could hurt. He has 8 TDs over his past 4 games, 280 yards or more passing in 3 of 4 of those games, and he has 12 TDs over his last 6 games. So he's not playing that bad, and he has a great matchup versus New Orleans this week.
What quarterback don't you want to see on your opponent's roster this week?
Peyton Manning.
Andrew Luck.
Hey, that works for me. Manning, it would have been nice if he...
Who are you going up against?
I'm going up against Ryan Tannehill.
That's a terrible matchup. Tannehill's been playing like garbage. You'll hear about him here in a few tiers. Tier 4, we have Matt Stafford, Mark Sanchez, and Eli Manning.
How's the butt fumble in Tier 4?
Well, if you look below Tier 4, there's not much out there, and Mark Sanchez is playing pretty decent football. He has a good matchup this week going against Dallas. They let up the 13th most fantasy quarterbacks. He didn't look great last week. He only had 96 yards, but he did throw for 2 touchdowns, and it was against Seattle, one of the best defenses in football. But he had 217 yards, a passing TD, and a rushing TD in Week 13 versus Dallas, which was Thanksgiving, I believe, correct?
Yeah.
So, since Mark Sanchez has become quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles, he's been getting it done.
Well, he hasn't ran into anybody's ass and fumbled the football, so I guess it's better than his previous play. But I'm looking at Eli Manning here going up against the Washington Redskins. They give up the most points to fantasy quarterbacks. Eli has just 1 TD pass in 4 of his last 5 games, but he did have 300 yards and 4 touchdowns against Washington earlier this year. He has 2+ TDs in 5 of 6 home games this year. The Giants put it on Tennessee, too, pretty good, and I think Eli had a pretty good game. So as bad as New York is, they're not at that bottom 5 of the league. I think they're somewhere in the bottom, maybe 10 or 15. So they definitely can put a nice spanking here on Washington, and he should put up a lot of points.
Yeah, he should. Washington can stop the run with the best of them, so the Giants are going to have to pass in this game, and Odell Beckham Jr. is a beast, so
Odell Beckham.
I expect Eli Manning to have a good week. Tier 5, I'm putting Johnny Manziel at the top of Tier 5.
Garbage.
Then we got Kyle Orton and Ryan Tannehill.
Johnny Manziel's a giant tool. I don't think he'll do anything in football. He'll have a good, first 16 games. He's Vince Young. That's all he is. He's Vince Young. He's going to wash out in 2 or 3 years when everybody figures out he doesn't know how to throw the ball and his accuracy's terrible, and we won't hear any more of Johnny football, thank God.
So you're saying you believe in him?
I do not. Hashtag I do not believe.
Well, Ryan Tannehill, you said you're going up against him this
I
week.
actually was wrong. That was a mistake. I'm up against Ben, so.
Oh, that hurts.
That does hurt.
That's a little bit different. But Tannehill, you wish you were going up against him.
Right.
He has just one TD over the past 2 weeks, and it was against bad defenses. So he's really hard to trust right now. Plus, he had the least amount of yards of the season against New England in week 1. New England's defense can get it done in the passing game for sure.
Well, I am the commissioner, so maybe I can sneak him into the roster.
There you go.
Yeah, go switch his roster before game time.
Well, let me say this real quick about Johnny Football. As much as I think he's garbage, it's his first NFL start. It's a huge game for Cleveland. They have no chance at the playoffs if they lose this game. And he is a playmaking style of quarterback. So with no film and no real idea how he plays in the NFL, Cincinnati only gives up the 9th fewest points to fantasy quarterbacks, but it could be a big day on the ground for
That's the
Manziel,
thing right there.
where he probably will put up points, and he will be a good fantasy quarterback for a couple years, but he'll wash out of the league. I guarantee it.
Tier 6, Jake Locker, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Derek Anderson, Joe Flacco, and Colt McCoy, who's questionable, but it does look like he will play, I think.
Snake got his bell rung. It's interesting to see you got Derek Anderson in against Tampa Bay. Is Cam Newton not playing?
Yeah, well, Cam Newton flipped his truck, and his back's messed up, so it looks like there's conflicting reports. I heard he is already out, but then there's some reports saying that he is most likely not going to play.
Play it safe. Bench him.
It's the same injury Tony Romo had earlier in the season, and Romo only missed 1 game, so he might be out.
Well, you got Cam Newton. You're not in the playoffs anyway, so don't even worry about it.
I had Cam Newton, and I made the playoffs, but he was on my bench most of the season.
Well, what about Jake Locker going up against the Jets? The Jets give up the 5th most points to fantasy quarterbacks. Locker went 9 for 11 last week, but he did throw a pick. He has 3 multi-pick games this season and just 1 multi-TD game, which was week 1 of the season. It was Zach Mettenberger for the last couple games down in Tennessee. Their whole team just looks like a Pop Warner team, if you ask me. Their offense is bad. Their defense is bad. Ken Wisenhunt needs to get the job done. He's supposed to be a fantasy guru. All that said, the Jets are complete garbage. They stop the run. They're going to force Tennessee to throw. So Locker's going to have to put the ball up a lot. So if you're stuck with him, you still have a little bit of a chance.
Yeah, I sort of like him this week. I'm feeling him.
They just got to get those receivers healthy out there. If Nate Washington's the number 1 receiver again, it's going to be tough for Locker.
They need to get Kenny Britt back.
Tier 7, Colin Kaepernick, Teddy Bridgewater, and either Josh McCown or Mike Glennon. Whoever starts for Tampa Bay this week. It's supposed to be Josh McCown, but they didn't rule out Glennon yet.
Is Glennon hurt?
No, he's not hurt.
Okay,
they
just
wanted
been
to go
playing
back.
the quarterback merry-go-round down there. Well, Colin Kaepernick is struggling this year. Everybody loved him. He's another example of the running quarterback who had early success. There's so many reports coming out of San Francisco saying Jim Harbaugh sabotaged this poor kid's career. He's going up against Seattle, who gives up the fewest points to fantasy quarterbacks. 1 TD or less in 7 straight games for Kaepernick. He has 295 yards passing, 1 touchdown, and 4 picks in his last 2 games. That's just terrible.
Stay away.
Yeah, and if you look at what he did against Seattle just a couple weeks ago, he had 121 yards, no touchdowns, and 2 picks. So there is
His
no
record
chance I'm
against
playing.
Seattle was terrible. It's really, really bad.
I believe it.
His quarterback rating, I think, is in the 40s against the Seahawks in his career.
His quarterback rating is probably under 40 this season. Tier 8, Alex Smith, Andy Dalton, Derek Carr, Blake Bortles, and Geno Smith.
No love for Blake.
Blake Bortles, he lost his girlfriend. He dropped to tier 8.
He does have a good matchup this week. He goes into Baltimore. They're terrible against the pass, but I'm still not going to trust it. He has 2 passing touchdowns over his last 4 games, so at this point in the season, he's not worth the risk at all.
I don't know if Alex Smith is worth the risk for me. He's going up against Oakland. They give up the 15th fewest points to fantasy quarterbacks. He does have 5 touchdowns over his last 3 games, including 2 touchdowns and 234 yards in Week 12 at Oakland. But he has only thrown for 200-plus yards in consecutive games twice this season. He had a season-high 293 yards last week, and I'm pretty sure he still has no touchdown passes to his wide receivers for the
Dwayne
season.
Bowe doesn't have any. I know that.
So that's done. It's just Alex Smith isn't playing awful. There's a lot of quarterbacks playing way worse, but he's not a fantasy guy. He's a game manager.
The reason I have Andy Dalton in Tier 8, he's not that bad. I know we don't like him, but he's definitely better than a Tier 8 guy, but he is questionable, and if you remember, the first time he went up against Cleveland is when he went 10 for 33 with 86 yards, 0 touchdowns, and 3 picks. So,
And that was before Tuitt broke his ribs.
So I'm staying far away from that.
Well, let's talk some tight ends. You got the Tier 1 elite guys, Jimmy Graham, Rob Gronkowski, Julius Thomas, and Greg Olsen. Thomas is still questionable. He was active last week, but he didn't even play a single snap, and that's kind of the reason why I think Denver's offense has slowed down in the last week or two. Well, I mean, slowed down for Denver anyway.
Yeah, and if anybody played him in their fantasy lineups, they probably aren't listening to this segment right now
Right.
because
Yeah.
they probably lost. But if you made it through and you did start Julius Thomas and you're still trying to win games, I play him. I'm not going to sit Julius Thomas. If he's active, I know he was active last week and he didn't play a snap, but it doesn't matter to me. There isn't too many good tight ends out there.
When you look outside of anywhere from Tier 1 to 3, nobody down there really is going to give you any amount of points anyway. So you're better off taking the risk with Thomas because the reward is huge, where maybe Jordan Cameron and Kyle Rudolph have the only chance in the lower tiers of going off as big as Thomas could.
I agree. Tier 2, Martellus Bennett and Antonio Gates.
I'm loving that A. Gates is a Tier 2 this week because he's starting for me. He's slowed down a little bit, but
He has.
it's time to turn it around, please.
No TD passes in 5 weeks, but he had a 2 TD week against Denver in week 8. So that's good for you.
Yeah, the last time he scored was actually against Denver, and he scored 2 touchdowns. So if you're looking for an upside, there it is.
And didn't their backup or second tight end take a massive hit versus New England last week?
You mean Ladarius Green?
That was him, man. He got laid out.
Oh, I didn't see it, but that's even more of a reason to play Antonio Gates this
Yeah,
week.
if they got no number 2, Gates is 1 and 2.
Well, he may play, but I'm sure he's still a little shaken, a little afraid to go across that middle, which A. Gates has never been known to be afraid of anything.
He's got a big ass. He just sticks it out and hopes for the best.
Do work.
Tier 3, Larry Donnell, Kobe Fleener, and Jordan Reed.
You've been putting Larry Donnell in this 3rd tier all year long, and I still have no clue who this guy is.
He's one of the top 10 tight ends all season long.
Well, who does he play for?
He
is my
plays for the
question.
Giants.
Okay, that's why I have no clue who he is, because I hate the Giants.
Well, he has a good matchup this week. He's going against Washington. They let up the 3rd most of fantasy tight ends. He only has 11 catches for 107 yards over his past 3 games, but he did have 7 for 54 and 3 touchdowns against Washington earlier this season. So I'm definitely playing him if I'm in the playoffs and I have him. And he has 6 or more targets in 6 of the past 7 weeks, so he's being used weekly.
Well, John, this will help you out slightly. I think Kobe Fleener going up against Houston's going to have a big week. I know Houston gives up the 7th fewest points to fantasy tight ends. Fleener only had 5 catches for 56 yards last week on 10 targets. He had 4 catches for 127 yards and 2 touchdowns the week before. This guy's had 7+ targets in 4 of the last 5 games. He only had 2 catches for 11 yards and 1 touchdown against Houston earlier in the year. But Luck's going to keep putting up points. That's good for John. Fleener's going to put up points. That's good for all you fans.
Yeah, take it for 3 TDs, Fleener. 3 of Luck's 6.
That's right.
Well, I'm playing him in my consolation game, if that matters at all.
No, close only counts in
Does
horseshoes
not.
and hand grenades.
Tier 4.
This is still a democratic society. We
I
ain't a
would
socialist country yet.
If I played this consolation game, I think I'd just sit my whole team.
Well, I'm playing Johnny Manziel over Jay Cutler just because I want to
See what
have him
happens.
in my lineup. Yeah.
Johnny football blowing up.
Tier 4, speaking of Johnny Manziel, Jordan Cameron at the top of Tier 4, and then we have Delaney Walker, Charles Clay, and Travis Kelce.
Cameron's one of the only guys below Tier 3 I think can have a big week. The Bengals give up the 11th most points to a fantasy tight end. He had 4 catches for 41 yards last week, so anyone that listened to us and started him didn't get burned too bad. Johnny Football's at quarterback this week. There's going to be a lot of running around, a lot of broken plays. Cameron's good at getting open. He's a quick guy for a big guy. So if you give him the chance to break off a route into a soft area in the defense, you get him the ball, big catch and run. It's going to be him and Johnny Manziel, or well, maybe Josh Gordon, I guess. But it's not like they're going to run the ball a whole lot. They're going to let Manziel take this game over.
Well, I've got Charles Clay on my bench. I'm not going to start him over Gates. He really hasn't had more points than Gates. Too many weeks this year, but
He's
he
been
only had,
injured a lot, too.
3 targets last week
Yeah.
after missing 2 straight games.
Tannehill's looked like garbage recently, too.
He's actually, Clay, he's sort of a sleeper. I like to have him just because a lot of people don't know of him, and when he's out there, he produces. You can't start him over Gates, no chance.
Not at this time of the year, especially.
Yeah, all four of these guys can have big games, but they've been pretty inconsistent all season, including Travis Kelce, who had 7 catches for 110 yards on 9 targets last week. And he has all the talent in the world. Like we were saying last week, him and Michael Rivera can always blow up, but their quarterbacks are just so terrible, it's hard to trust. Tier 5, Jason Witten, Scott Chandler, and Michael Rivera, who I just mentioned.
Jason Witten, that old man's still hanging around. He's going up against Philly. They give up the 3rd fewest points to fantasy tight ends. Witten has definitely tailed off the last 2 years. I think some injuries have finally caught up with him. Playing the position, that's a rough position to play. He only had 3 catches for 34 yards on 5 targets over the past 2 games after 4 straight double-digit fantasy performances. 1 reception for 8 yards against Philly in Week 13. Don't look for anything big out of him. If you have him and he's the only guy you can start, I mean, you're not completely screwed. There's a shot, but I wouldn't hold your breath. You better hope some of your other players get some points for you.
Yeah, it's a shame because he's a solid player.
Solid guy.
Definitely.
One of the few Cowboys that I don't really hate.
And he's definitely winding down the days, the weeks. He's not going to be around much longer, but he's like a Heath Miller, sort of, a little bit more targeted, I think. And he's a great player, and
he's got a little left in the tank.
It's a shame they're slowing him down.
Heath has really kind of picked it up more than I thought he would this year.
One guy who could have a big week is this Scott Chandler. They go up against Green Bay. They aren't bad against tight ends. They led up the 14th fewest of fantasy tight ends. But he had 8 catches for 81 yards on 11 targets last week. And like I said, Orton's going to be passing a ton in this game. So Chandler could blow up if you really have nothing to play. I'd give him a shot.
Is it warming up in the studio for you guys?
Yeah, it is warming up in here.
You know why it's warming up? Because we got our Tier 6 tight ends coming up. Dwayne Allen, the best tight end to ever play for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Heath Miller, and Kyle Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. You love him, Dash. You love my nicknames, too. I know you talk about them when I'm gone.
Your nicknames are so horrible.
Oh, they're the
Berman
best.
style.
Please believe.
You're nipping at Berman's heels.
Well, I'm going to talk about my man Heath Miller, of course.
Obviously.
He's going up against Atlanta, who give up the 6th fewest points to fantasy tight ends.
I like that.
He did score last week, but he had just 1 reception for 1 yard, so he went 1, 1, and 1, but that still got him, 8 points? So as a Tier 6 guy, that's not terrible.
7 points.
7 points, I'm sorry. You don't get 7 for a touchdown. He has 22 catches for 218 yards and 1 touchdown against 3 NFC opponents this season.
Yeah, he does get it done against NFC opponents, though.
And he's on turf. It's going to be a little bit better conditions for him. The Steelers run the ball really well. And Dash, real quick, me and you've been talking about the Steelers run game and how they like to pull a guard.
Right.
I went back and looked at some of the tape. They've been pulling Heath Miller as their guard because the Castro's not great at it. And Ramon Foster's been injured, some of the season. So they have been using Heath as that pulling guard from the tight end position. And it's made Le'Veon Bell's life so much easier. So as much as Heath maybe not be a great fantasy tight end, he's a great tight end to have on your team because he does everything you need him to.
Well, Johnny Parlay, next season you got to give a point for every time a tight end pulls.
Yes.
I don't know about that. I don't know if the commissioner has that authority, but one person will be happy if Heath blocks all day is Johnny Parlay because that's who I'm going up against. Heath Miller, so.
Well, I want him to get a catch at least because Heath has a string of almost 100 games where he's had a catch when he's active. So
how about one catch, 1 yard?
1 yard, yeah. There you go.
Catch
Just
it
like
behind
last
the line.
For a first down, how's that?
Okay, 3rd and 1, make the catch.
All right.
Go down, then block
Then block the rest of the
Tier 7, Zach Ertz, Jermaine Gresham, who is questionable, and Owen Daniels.
Zach, I'm going to put the Ertz on somebody who's disappointed me this year. He's going up against Dallas. They give up the most points to tight ends. He scored his first TD in 7 games last week, but he had just 2 catches for 39 yards on 3 targets, and he cannot be trusted with the butt fumble at quarterback.
It's not Mark Sanchez is so terrible that you don't want to play Ertz. It's that he's not even looking his way.
He only knows how to look one way, towards a dude's ass so he can run into it.
Well, your sleeper tight end last week was Jermaine Gresham, and he ended up with a touchdown. He didn't do much. He had 3 catches for 23 yards, but hey, that touchdown helped.
For a Tier 7 guy, that's not too bad, right?
A little charity TD.
He's injured, though, right? He got a toe injury last week?
No, it didn't happen during the game. It actually happened in practice this week.
I thought maybe James Harrison just walked over and stomped on his foot in between plays or something.
You're dead wrong. Tier 8. Eric Ebron, Mercedes Lewis, Vernon Davis, and Tim Wright.
Eric Ebron was supposed to put up huge numbers for Detroit this year. They brought him in as a first-round pick, hoping he'd help in the passing game. Their passing game's kind of regressed. He's going up against Minnesota, who give up the 4th fewest points to fantasy tight ends. He has 3 receptions or less in 9 of 10 games played this year and just 1 TD on the year. He's dropped a lot of balls. If you've watched any of the games, he's been madly inconsistent for the Lions.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I have him ranked here is because he plays for the Lions, and you never know what can happen. They can always blow up for 40-plus points and find him in the red zone, but really, you don't want to play this guy.
Well, Mercedes Lewis, it's about time to change your name to Toyota Corolla because this guy's tier 8, not even on the map. Although last week, 3 catches, 69 yards. That's not too bad, but that's not putting up points still. And you still got Bortles, who's not aged yet. Don't even go near him.
Lewis is too old. Bortles isn't old enough, right?
Put the Corolla in the garage.
I tell you who I would play him over. Vernon Davis. Dude is garbage.
He is garbage. Vernon Davis, you are officially the garbage fantasy player of the year.
Ouch.
We don't even have stats written down here for you because you are garbage. You could be the single reason why poor Kaepernick, even though I hate him, is doing terrible because you don't do anything.
Help.
The whole passing offense there is bunk.
I hate their offense. Outside of Frank Gore, I hate their offense.
Don't even know what to say. I mean, but still follow us, Vernon Davis, if you want.
Follow us on Twitter at bet_the_spread, and you can like us on Facebook. Well, let's wrap up this fantasy segment with 5 defenses. You got the Giants going up against Washington. You got the Colts versus Houston. Minnesota versus Detroit, Johnny Parlay's pick of the week. Carolina versus Tampa Bay, and the Jets at Tennessee. And I've noticed that every time Tennessee plays, whoever's playing them, you think that's a good matchup.
Even the Jets.
Even the Jets.
Yes, sir.
Tennessee has given up the 6th most fantasy points to team defenses. The Jets had 3 sacks, a pick, and a fumble recovery last week at Minnesota. It's bad. It's bad news bears for Tennessee here.
Yeah, well, like you said, it doesn't matter who Tennessee's playing. I'm going to take their defense.
Especially
they're my 5th sleeper defense, so I don't expect huge points out of them. But Tennessee's offense is
Jake Locker, quarterback,
just garbage right now. Play the Jets if there's nothing.
Locker's probably going to throw 3 pick sixes.
My most surprising one on here probably is Minnesota's defense at Detroit.
Oh, Parlay likes that.
Detroit's given up the 17th most fantasy points to team defenses, so they're not great, they're not terrible. But Minnesota, they have 7 sacks, 2 interceptions, and a fumble recovery, plus 3 TDs over their last 2 games. They have 11 sacks, 4 interceptions, 4 fumble recoveries, and a TD in their last 3 road games. And they had 4 sacks versus Detroit in Week 6. So Minnesota has been playing very well defensively over the past few weeks.
Well, I hope that Detroit's O gets shredded. That'd be nice because the O gets shredded, and hopefully the D will get shredded too because my opponent has Detroit's D.
But hopefully Joik Bell blows up.
That would also be a nice feather in the cap.
That's what makes fantasy so tough. You have to root for the most crazy, possibilities that it just makes football maddening sometimes.
But listen, my number 1 sleeper defense, the New York Giants. Why? 15 sacks, 2 picks, 1 fumble recovery, and 1 touchdown over their last 2 games. That's huge numbers. They're starting to turn it around a little bit. I like the Giants here, especially with Washington not even knowing what they're going to do at quarterback this week.
That's right. Yeah.
All in one breath, you said that.
Giants D, that's where it's at.
Well, I want to thank both of you for coming in and doing this with me today. I want to thank you fans for listening. You can follow us on Twitter at bet_the_spread, like us on Facebook, and subscribe to that YouTube channel.
And hopefully next week my input matters because I'll be victorious.
Victory! Just like Johnny Drama.